founded this company and called it SidePorch because we wanted to be able to bring communities together to talk about important things. So if we were able to right now, we'd be sitting on a side porch somewhere. The one we had in mind was the side porch in the Smoky Mountains, looking out over this beautiful scenery of this world that we need to protect, wanting to be able to bring people that we care about together to talk about important things. So that's what we're trying to create here. You'll see the chat function is enabled so that everyone has a chance to talk with each other and connect. We didn't want to close that off. We do want to create a sense of community. We'd encourage everyone, if possible, to rename yourselves to be able to have your name and then the affiliation that you're with. After this, if anyone wants to connect with people and we can help with that, we'd like to. We want to share information that we've been learning. In this session, we're going to talk about universities and university athletic programs. We're going to have future sessions where next week we're going to be talking about cities and municipalities and then other industries as we go. But we want to be able to bring groups together so that you have a chance to learn from each other. We have a chance to learn from you, and that we could share perspectives and wisdom across these complex systems that we're all working with. This session is not a solicitation. I think it's clear we're trying hard to support groups and make connections. That's not what this is about. This is about, we're not here to be selling and be acting as consulting group. We're here to try and share knowledge that's going to be able to help people that have to make decisions right now. Over the last couple months, the SidePorch, since we began, we've been working with organizations across complex systems that are trying to make a positive impact on the planet. Agnostic in terms of industry and sector, we've moved across everything from helping build fusion reactors to helping expand networks for USAID to supporting strategy development for starting NGOs. So we've worked in and among all these groups, but since COVID started, we've supported the development of PCR labs, operations and sales channels for them. We've helped major counties in the country build their testing programs. We've worked with universities. We've worked with law firms to respond to COVID. And so because we've seen across these different industries, we wanted to start pulling things together to share. We're really fortunate and blessed to be joined today by two friends and people that we really respect a lot, Dr. Jill Carter-Roberis and Bryce McDonald, whom we'll introduce in a little bit and give a chance to share some of what they've been hearing. Logistics, again, we're recording this. We're going to put it up, just those of us that are talking, so that we can share this with a wider audience. Please, in the chat, if you have questions, please put any questions you have there. Andy Reamer from our team is going to be feeding it to Lorene and to me so that we can ask these questions. Anything that we don't get to in today's session, we will do our best to try and get answers, or at least throw some ideas to folks who ask those questions. For about 2, 3, 4 minutes, I want to share a few insights that we've learned in our time at SidePorch, working with universities and university athletic programs. These, I think, are somewhat applicable beyond these domains, but they do certainly apply with the topics that we're talking about today. The important piece that all of us are grappling with right now is we are operating in an environment with insufficient information, not knowing when that information is going to come, and with new pressures hitting us and our communities in ways that we haven't had, most of us at least, haven't had a chance to experience and work with in the past. And with this, many organizations typically kind of go into that same fight and flight mentality that individuals do when faced with pressure, where they stop and try not to make decisions and delay decisions as long as possible because they don't have enough information, or try and launch forward and make decisions as though they had full information a few years hence. What we think is really necessary, and we're going to talk about and explore this a bit today, is making the best decisions you have right now with the information available, but make sure that you're flexible and able to continue adapting as you go. And because of this environment we're in, there is no playbook. There is no set playbook that we can hand to a university or a sports team and say, here's what you should do. But we do think right now there are certain approaches that work and that are necessary to integrate into what you're doing. One of them, and this is something that for SidePorch has been core to what we've done for a long time, it really is important to start with the ethos and the underlying values that your organization stands for, and how you are committed and responsible for serving your community. So looking to what you stand for, we think, is an important piece for any leader who's trying to responsibly and ethically lead their communities through this time. And then there's the policies, the procedures, the execution underneath, but we're seeing that there's a bridge in between of creating what we're calling a culture of health. It comes from best practices that Robert Wood Johnson and other leading industries in healthcare sector have put forward to say that based on our values and our ethos, here is what we define health for our community to be, which is not just physical, not just even physical and mental, but emotional, spiritual, occupational. There's many other aspects of health that we think need to be taken into account. And come up with a statement that you say, this is what we stand for. This is what we as an institution are going to be held accountable for. And importantly, here's what we're going to hold those in our communities responsible for to contribute to this overall culture of health. This bridge we see is really important between the ethos of an organization and the practices and policies that you're carrying out, which allow for one to be more agile and flexible in changing as things happen over time. And the last thing I'll say before I pass it over to Laureen and Dr. Riveras, relative risk is part of the game that we're playing here. How do we ascertain the current relative risk in our community and then find ways to manage and mitigate that risk going forward to the best ability that we have based on the resources within the context that we're operating? There is no one way to make our entire community safe, especially not in the diverse, complex communities that those on this Zoom are trying to serve. But through testing, through policies, through distancing, through culture, through communications, through a whole array of resources that we can look across, we have a chance to try and understand and manage that risk going forward. And so I think we're going to be talking a lot about that as we move into this conversation. But right now, I'd like to throw it over to my colleague, Laureen Chandler. She's been a friend and a colleague for quite a long time right now. She's worked with SidePorch on a few educational focused engagements and has been part of our team and leading our team since the very beginning of this COVID crisis. So Jill, Dr. Riveras, and Laureen are going to now have the next bit of time. Please do send questions in. We'll ask a few questions from the audience to Laureen to moderate at the end of this session. Then I'll talk to Bryce, and then we'll throw it out to the group for wider questions. But over to you, Laureen.
Thanks, Sean. I'm excited. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the call today and to really engage in this conversation about how higher education is responding to COVID. As Sean mentioned, over the past 4 months, we've really watched all sectors and industries respond differently to the uncertainty of the virus. And we've really been learning a lot from universities and athletics who are leading the way on developing really solid reopening plans and coming up in, weeks ahead, being able to roll these out. So I will quickly turn it over, and to kick us off, I have the pleasure of introducing and having a conversation with Dr. Jill Carter-Riveras. And Dr. Jill has served for 9 years as the Director of Health and Counseling at the Cowell Center at Santa Clara University. So welcome, Dr. Jill. And I thought we'd start off the conversation by having you share a little bit about your roles and responsibilities at the center. I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Well, that would be helpful. Good morning. As you mentioned, I am the Director of Health and Counseling at Santa Clara University. I'm a psychologist by profession. I've worked in student affairs my entire career, which has been well over 30 years. And as you mentioned again, I've been at Santa Clara for 9 of those years. I oversee student health services, counseling and psychological services, the university student health insurance plan, and I oversee their emergency medical services of the EMTs. And the role that I serve, Santa Clara is a Jesuit institution, and it operates from the Jesuit value of cura personalis, which means that we take care of the whole person. So we care for the personal development of the whole person. And as the Director of Health and Counseling, I'm in a unique position of caring for the bodies of our students, which means we meet their medical needs. And I also get to take care of their minds and their souls. And so we talk to them with their physical health. We make sure that they're okay. We developed a program called I Will Till I'm Well, which gives students permission to seek the help that they need until they feel that they're well. And it's a critical charge and an awesome charge that I've been given. And in the whole mindset of cura personalis, we also care for the spirit. So we partner with religious programs to kind of develop the spirit of the individual. So that's basically my role at Santa Clara.
Thank you. Yeah, you bring such a unique perspective and great perspective to this, especially in terms of, COVID being, a physical illness, but we're seeing really the mental health effects of this on our society. So I think that you bring a unique perspective, especially as we think about how the health centers will play into how the campus is reopening. And so I really was hoping you could share a little bit about the university's effort of the reopening plan, and particularly your role within some of the working groups, particularly around testing.
Yeah, as you mentioned, just caring for the whole person. It's more than just the impact of COVID on the body, it's the impact of COVID on the mind. And as a role in the university, as everyone, my role is to work together to keep the Santa Clara community healthy and safe. And when COVID first came to the scene, the university established what's known as a policy group to watch over the effects of COVID on the university student body. And being over student health services at the university, I was a part of that policy group. And the policy group met weekly with the president's cabinet. And after a period of time, to better prepare the university for how it would move forward in sustaining the function and the operation of the university, the president broke down the policy group and converted into an overarching group called COVID-19 Resilience and Recovery Working Group. And from there, 7 groups came out of that. The first was teaching and learning, and that just was a group that solicited the ideas in support of teaching and learning in the fall. Another group was the financial integrity of the institution, that basically focuses on the budget and the cash flow of the institution, the endowment fundraising, and the financial aid, undergraduate and graduate enrollment. And then another group that came out of this was campus operations, and that's just a support to the return to the classroom vision that's outlined by this resilience and recovery teaching and learning and student experience. And within that group is the testing subgroup and the tracking and the tracing subgroup, for which I serve on. And the testing subgroup just looks at different vendors that would help to test our students prior to coming back, making sure that students are disease-free, or if they should contract COVID, how we plan to work with them, and then how we track and trace the community that may have been in vicinity of a positive test case. And so that is really a lot of the work that I've been doing. But just quickly, some of the other groups, which I feel is very important, would be the student experience. There's a group of professionals within the university that's looking at the cross-functional working groups, such as social connectedness, diversity and inclusion, health and well-being, the new student experience, as well as athletics. And then we have staff engagement, where we're focusing on the working environment, how to support staff, and how to support the supervisory roles of staff. And then legal and governance of the Santa Clara community, as well as communication. Like, how do we put forth information to both the internal and external worlds of Santa Clara?
Thank you. That was really helpful and insightful. And I think, I heard you say like the 7 working groups and how that broke down over time as you guys monitored the COVID crisis. One question that comes out of this, and I think that people in the audience will really be interested in as we frame some of these questions around resources, is what is Santa Clara's current plan going into the fall semester in terms of in-person, virtual, is it a hybrid, and how is SCU kind of looking at being flexible and adjusting to these plans as new information comes about?
Thank you. That's a great question. As we plan for the fall, we're guided basically by 2 principles. The first principle is to protect the health and safety of our campus community, and secondly, to offer a rigorous transformational education in the long tradition of Jesuit education. And with those guided principles in mind, our plan is data-driven. It's relying on the best scientific resources that are available, including using our own faculty members as experts and working closely with our local health officials to adapt the latest conditions. And under those principles, we have what's known as a blended model. It's blended and virtual courses. So many of our courses will be offered in a blend of in-person and online instruction. So some courses will have content that's delivered online with a blend of synchronous or real-time and asynchronous pre-recorded content. And the opportunities for the synchronous lessons will be virtual engagement with the faculty, and any student may choose to take some or all of his or her classes online. So in this blended virtual course model, courses might consist of a combination of the following. So we have what's known as high flex, and that's a fully synchronous model where faculty will teach courses in person, with some students joining in person as needed, and some will be joining remotely. And then the second model is a flipped classroom, where we have asynchronous and a synchronous mix, where lectures or other learning materials are shared with students for independent learning, and that can be followed by in-person and synchronous online class meetings. And then the third model is a dual classroom model. Again, that's asynchronous and a synchronous mix, where students can take turns attending class in person. So the instructor teaches the same synchronous lesson twice, while the other half of the class can work independently or in groups on the asynchronous material. And then the last would be the labs and the specialty courses, and that's where we get the science and the engineering labs, some of the studio art classes, some of the music classes, theater and dance, and other areas that often kind of require high touch, close contact interactions. Those will be restructured to meet the rigorous safety standards. And many will be offered in person, but with modifications designed to meet the challenges associated with being in person and having in-person instructions in each of these disciplines mentioned.
Thank you.
Now, so, along with universities, we found that the university athletic programs are, we think, pretty important and relevant to this conversation. Like universities, the athletic programs have to make decisions. And if anything, the athletic programs with students coming in over the summer have to make decisions right now. So there's an urgency to them. And there's some interesting aspects of the athletic programs, both the conferences, the athletic programs at universities, and individual sports that are slightly different from the school communities that we thought was important to talk through here. For instance, something that we've learned across is that different sports programs at different universities have varied relationships with main campus. Some sports programs are seen as leaders because they're making decisions now and they're kind of the vanguard for universities. Others are sitting and waiting for the main campus to make decisions. And because of that, there's been different levels of success that programs have experienced. Something else that some of the sports teams get that some of the campus communities we're seeing are just figuring out is the important context of those you're coming in contact with. So it's not just your team or your community or those coming to your facilities. These sports teams, like what Bryce will talk about, are preparing to take at times up to 100 or a couple hundred people to other contexts at other schools. We've helped put together RFPs for the Pac-12 and for the Big East for the NCAA, where they're trying to figure out how do we work across all of these different schools who are having different approaches, and how do you merge all these things together. So Bryce McDonald is going to join me right now. Bryce is a friend and a colleague of years now. He had a long history as a U.S. Marine and gave really great service to our country. Left active service to work at the Naval Academy as kind of a bridge between military life and civilian life. where he served on the as a coach on their football team, and then was recently brought out here to Los Angeles to be chief of staff in an operational role to a major football program. So Bryce really brings a pretty interesting understanding of the different contexts in which we're operating right now. So we want to throw over to Bryce. So like where we started with Jill, Bryce, could you just give a quick overview of who you are, what your normal role is, and then maybe roll into how COVID has started to change that role up a bit?
Absolutely, Sean. Good morning, everybody. Currently the chief of staff at UCLA football. What that role pretty much means, you're a switch and a conduit between the head coach and everything else. I assist him in doing everything except for calling plays. We should be very thankful for that here at UCLA. So before COVID, responsibility was to understand the mission and the vision of this football team. And here at UCLA, #1 public school in the nation, very high academics. This is not a one-trick pony. This is a lot of facets. Like Sean mentioned earlier, there's some places where the football team is making the first plans for all the COVID. They're the main show. Out here, UCLA is a $6.8 billion industry in the medical field. So UCLA could do without football, but we're very grateful that they're working with us and assisting us throughout the process. But we are not the main show out here, not one bit. We are multiple levels down. So like I stated, vision and mission, just pre-COVID, we are using football as a bridge to develop the next generation of successful young men. Whether that's making them go to class every day, assisting them with their academics, properly supporting them, mental welfare, physically, and teaching them the tools and assisting whatever facets possible we can assist off the field. And on the field, we're going into our 3rd season, if that ever occurs. We're on the phone with all these universities and educational institutions. Just like you all, we have no idea if we're going to play. It's just a systematic process right now of delay. But we're going to our 3rd season, which statistically in the past, we feel that football and academically and professionally, we're going to see a lot of results, but we'll see that in the future. Transitioning to pre-COVID to post-COVID, if football and staff communication was 100% our job, now it's 10% football. Our coaches, which in our eyes, our coaches are teachers, coaches and mentors. Most of our Zoom calls, 90% what we talk to our kids about is health and welfare. Make sure everything is good on the home front. We have about 100 players back here doing voluntary workouts, making sure they're logging into classes, making sure they're properly fed, making sure their family's okay. And I think Sean mentioned earlier, the mental health aspect of the unknown is very important right now, especially for young men in this environment, 18 to 24 years old.
So Bryce, can I ask, I was going to ask this a little later on, but you teed it up. These students and your staff coming in, they're not just dealing with COVID, right? Many of the incoming freshmen didn't have a proper graduation. Everyone on your team and everyone in our nation has, been grappling with protests that have arisen due to racial inequalities around the country. So there's a lot of challenges and pressures on these students. Can you talk a bit about what you're hearing from the students as they're coming back to campus? Like how are you supporting them?
So this is a big topic. As soon as the George Floyd video came out, I got a call with the staff this Sunday before the next week started, and we attacked it head on because you saw social media flare up. And as staff members, coaches, mentors, our first move was to seek understanding. And if you think COVID is an unknown environment, throw in the social injustice, and we are still learning. And as we all know, this thing's a long way from being over, and we have to still seek to learn and communicate. So what we did initially was our head coach, we have a leadership council of about 15 players. He got on the phone with them all that night. And then we got on a team meeting the next day and let the players speak their mind, whether it was questions, statements. And then they had great conversations with each other. They had great conversations with the coaches. And then we kept that frequency up to make sure we were all communicating. And we have a pretty good rhythm of just getting the team together and communicating. And subsets to that, each position coach is in charge of his own position. So they get time every week and NCAA designates this as football time. For us, it's listen to your players talk. If you have an opportunity to educate them, but most of it is learning what's going on in your player's mind. If he needs any assistance, assist him. Health and welfare calls every week. And we've established a rhythm of communication, and it's pretty, we try to practice a 70-30 concept. It's not just us talking, it's listening to our guys.
Well, thanks, Bryce. And something that we've noted, or at least that we've seen at SidePorch, is the organizations that we really look up to and think are worth following and learning from are groups that understand that responding in a pandemic isn't just specifics on physical health and testing and medical health provisioning, but it's also taking care of the whole human being, which we heard from Jill in Santa Clara, and we'll hear more about that. But Bryce, can you talk about the specifics? So what have you guys put in place to protect your team, to be able to bring the team back for summer practices? And what are you putting in place in terms of operations and resources necessary to carry out a season if and when it occurs?
It's a great question, Sean. So we've got a very robust return to training group from the athletic department, fed into the hospital side, 2 doctors that work with our athletic department, but they report to UCLA Medical. So housing, academics, sports medicine, strength and conditioning, and then UCLA medicine on this return to training group. They meet multiple times a week and tackle everything from processes of checking in, workouts, how to safely clean post-workouts, what's a safe amount of people, how are we distributing food properly, how many guys are going to be staying in a room, is there housing available for guys returning to campus, et cetera, et cetera. For every decision that is made in the city of LA and in the county of LA, and in the UC system, and then the state of California, there are layers. And for every decision that's made, we're talking hundreds of logistical issues. So just the rhythm of communication, standards we put in place. Do you want to hear about the check-ins, testing, or anything like that, Sean?
I think if you could give a few examples of what you've put in place, that would be helpful. Testing is a question that many groups are grappling with, and I'd like to come back to Santa Clara on what they're doing for testing too. So if you can mention that, and maybe some of the challenges you found in finding testing to be able to actually accommodate your needs.
Okay. So processes, guys coming back to campus, young men coming back to campus, if you fly back to campus, it's a 7-day quarantine before you're allowed to get your physical and work out. If you drive, it's a 3-day quarantine before you're allowed to test, get your physical and work out. And then when I say test, get your physical from sports medicine and work out, that was with the understanding you're getting the results of your test back. So that being the first part of our plan, we went with a very trusted laboratory here in LA. In the first week, it took us a week to get our results back. So you're guiding these young men and their parents, because we're still dealing with college students. Every bit of communication is with their parents also. And you start to get these parents wondering why it's taking a week to get them back to working out, and they have to stay in quarantine phase. So that first week after it took a lot of time to get our numbers back, I made a call to Sean and asked him if this was normal. And he guided us, connecting him with the decision makers, the doctors over at UCLA Health, put us on target. And now we're getting turnaround numbers anywhere from less than 24 to 36 hours. So our process is actually running a little smoothly now, thanks to you, Sean.
All right, thanks for that, Bryce. This actually is an open invitation we're going to send to everyone. We'll put a link up in the chat box, but if there's any groups that are looking for quality resources we can connect you to, we'll make that introduction today or tomorrow or whenever you need it. We've been trying to identify resources around the country that are driven by values-based, ethos-based organizations so that you got good partners to work with over time. But with that one, Bryce, if you don't mind, I want to throw this over to Sam Florio. We're also joined by one of Jill's colleagues at Santa Clara who's led the testing working group at Santa Clara University. Sam, would you mind talking a little bit about what you're doing on main campus for setting up testing across to be able to support your different communities? Because it's slightly different from what the sports teams are doing.
Sure. And we have the benefit of getting a sense of what our sports teams have been doing as they are moving forward. We don't have the 100+ numbers that a UCLA football team, but our smaller teams are doing something similar in our soccer teams. But for the main campus, right now, as we sit here on, and I say this all the time with my caveat, on July 22nd at 9:39 on Pacific time, our plan is to, as Jill mentioned, test everyone in the fall. We are a university that's not connected to a medical center, so we have to find a partner to be able to help test upwards of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 staff, faculty, and students all at once in a few-day period. And so, as Bryce mentioned, trying to find that partner that can be able to do something like that, plus get the turnaround, because if we delay 7 days, that's a large portion of our quarter that's missed by our students, staff, and faculty. So it's important to find that partner. So we've been working hard to find a good partner to be able to work together, to be able to find that partner that can, number one, for us, because we're not tied to a medical center, provide us with some logistical support. So in other words, thinking almost like picking up a dock in a box or a medical facility and dropping it at Santa Clara University and then running 4,000 people through it in order to get that information going. And then having the software support to be able to set up the appointments, set up potential insurance response, as well as funneling back the results to both the patient, our staff, faculty, or student, as well as have access for the university, getting the approval for all my risk management friends that may be on this call on the front end from that patient to be able to allow us to see that information. So that logistical and that onerous task is something that we've been working on over the last probably 8 weeks to be able to really fine tune and figure out where we want to go. We've are identifying some partners as we speak. We're identifying the logistical partners to help us figure out how we're going to be able to process all of that, be it through all those things you see on TV, the drive-through testing, to potentially, of course, one-on-one, face-to-face testing. So we've gone through this whole process. Sean and his team have helped us, as well as Bryce, find some of these partners to be able to help out, which has been great. So it's been a great opportunity for us to figure these things out. The thing that worries me and keeps me up at night a little bit is the logistical piece, and making certain that we can pick up that dock in the box and drop it here and let's go and get 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 done. I know it can be done. I just want to have a little trepidation about let's get it done.
Thank you, Sam. I think several of your colleagues on the call also share in some of these concerns that you have about the actual administration and rollout of some of these plans that are coming together right now. And Jill, I did want to thank you for joining. Sorry, we dropped you off, but want to join you back in the conversation and hear a little bit about some of picking up on Sam's thread in terms of the concerns maybe that are most pressing for you or that you're hearing right now from students as they start to return.
Sure. Yeah, the students are very concerned about loneliness. They're afraid of the whole isolation, not being able to partner with their friends or to engage in community as they once had in the past. There's a lot of depression and a lot of fear that students are experiencing. And so from a mental health model, again, the whole I will till I'm well, we're giving students permission to seek the help that they need. And we're working with them both virtually and in office. So we have a hybrid model, both medically and behaviorally. So a student can come into the center. If their depression is to a point where they feel like they cannot manage it, we will meet with them in person. If they're in crisis for any reason, we will meet with them. If otherwise, we're just going to do telepsychology versus in-person therapy. And also on the medical side, we will do telemedicine. And if a student has a physical crisis, they can come in and we will meet with them one-on-one. So that's basically the concerns that we're hearing from students, and we're meeting them parallel to how we're meeting them in the educational environment, both in person and virtually.
Cool. Thanks, Jill. I want to follow up on a thread that's come through here and maybe start with Bryce and then come back over to you, Jill. As we look ahead of this year, there's a lot of stuff that we don't know what's going to happen. So Bryce, question is, what if you lose the season? And this is not for the USC people on the call about if UCLA does poorly this season, but what if the season doesn't happen? If we think about the loss that's happening for your student athletes, for your team, but also for your university. Can you talk through how you guys are preparing for that, not knowing quite what's going to happen, and how are we going to take care of each other if some of the things that we really expect and look forward to in the year and in people's lives, like this is a big deal for a bunch of people and not just the athletes. Can you talk about that a bit, Bryce?
Great question. It's a real, I wouldn't call it concern. It's a real option. As we all know, with the numbers just increasing right now. Right now, with the student athletes and the parents, what we're doing is just letting them be aware. Our number one mission here is we've got student that happen to be athletes, correct? And we have talked to them that, we may not have a season. We are systematically pushing the season back to keep your health and welfare as number one. We have a very strong mental welfare protocol here at UCLA. Every student has to check in upon return to campus. And if this does occur, you see it all across the nation right now. Multiple conferences have switched to the spring. Multiple states and high schools have switched to the spring. And this could just be a anchor point to possibly cancel the season if the numbers don't improve. But there are a lot of implications. Schools are already prepping to let people go. As we saw, 11 sports were removed at Stanford. Multiple other Pac-12 schools have had to designate essential and non-essential personnel. If it comes to that, I've spoke with my wife, I've spoke with my family. It's a real situation. I would get fired, and I know any faculty worth their salt would get fired 100 times out of 100 in order to keep the students safe. If they can't afford to play a season because of health, so be it. Then you have to make changes on your staff because you can't afford it, so be it. Here at UCLA, that's a president of a chancellor of the school conversation. I'm not privy to those yet, and we have not yet had those conversations yet here.
So Bryce, follow up on that, and I think it is to be expected that you and Jill have been really focusing on the students, which is really all of most leadership at universities. That's where the focus needs to be. Can you say a little bit about staff and the other facility managers, the other, the adults working in these programs as well, and the impact that it's having on them and how you're supporting them. And then maybe we'll throw over to Jill for that similar question of how Santa Clara is lining up to support the staff and faculty. We have about 13 minutes left here. So if anyone has questions, please do put them in chat. At the hour, we'll probably break off the recording, but I and my colleagues will stay on and answer any questions that folks have if you want to keep talking. But we got like 10 minutes left. So Bryce, what about the staff and faculty on the team?
So it's my job as the chief of staff to take care of our staff the same way we're providing opportunities to mental welfare checks and providing assets and outreach to our coaches and faculty members. In corporate America, you're probably seeing that during this COVID crisis, corporation goes from 100% people pulling their load to going down to a 20% workload. All the heavy lifters are doing most of the work in corporate America right now, if they're essential personnel and have to go in, especially in the hot spots. But all of our facility personnel right now, our strength and conditioning and our sports medicine guys are on the forefront. It's our head coach, it's our athletic director, it's myself. We make sure we have a high frequency of calling them, getting feedback, and making sure they need support as much as possible. Because right now it's the people keeping the lights on that's actually coming into work. But the other coaches, COVID's a real concern. We have some older coaches, making sure doctors are reaching out to the older coaches so they have a safe return, if they return at all. But outreach, just like we're doing with the student athletes to the staff. A little love goes a long way, and that's our number one value here.
Cool, thanks, Bryce. Jill, can you talk a bit about how Santa Clara is setting up to be able to support the faculty and staff as well as the students?
Sure. We're funneling resources to our community. First, let me say we're very fortunate in that no one has been laid off. There have not been any furloughs. I think that is awesome. And I tell my staff, we have a job. Let's thank God that we have a job. And so the second thing I want to say is engagement. We keep them engaged. So it's engagement, engagement, engagement. We educate them about COVID, the impact of COVID. We're keeping social media alive. We communicate constantly with email and, again, social media. We keep our student voice very strong. So we meet like this in Zoom meetings. We talk about university events and programs. So we're doing everything that we would normally do. So we've not stopped any of that. We're just now doing it via Zoom or virtual. So we're keeping that connection alive. And I think that's amazing. And it's amazing for the students and the faculty and the staff. We're keeping faculty and staff connected to human resources and the EAP program. We're listening to what it is they need. The university is constantly trying to meet that need. We send out communications weekly. We hear the voices of our people. And you'd be amazed at how far that goes, right? It just touches everyone on the human level, and they come back. They feel free to articulate what their needs are, and then they know that as an institution, we're doing all within our power to meet that. And that's extremely comforting, on top of not being laid off, so.
Thanks, Jill. So we got a question that went to, how do we think about service to the most vulnerable communities in that we're tasked with working with, in a really awkward sentence that I just said. So thanks, Edgar, for sending that over. I'm gonna throw this over to Sam in a second to talk through how Santa Clara grappled with this. What we found actually is the framing that Edgar just shared is one that we've encouraged groups to think through as a starting point, that if you can identify who the most at-risk vulnerable populations in the communities you're in charge of are, and build your policies and procedures, your culture of health focused on those groups first, likely you're going to find that you care for all the rest of the people in the equation as well. But that is a framing. But Sam, we saw you guys have a discussion recently where even figuring out what vulnerable communities meant was a really fascinating topic that needed that kind of underlying ethos to help you guys guide through. Can you speak a little bit about that? And then maybe later on we could talk about capacity issues, but how have you guys defined those groups that you really wanted to focus upon in the Santa Clara community?
Well, I can talk a little bit about very early in the whole pandemic process. I'm talking back March, February, end of February, March. You all may recall of the retirement community in Seattle that I think was in the Seattle area that had a horrible outbreak and a number of deaths as a result of COVID-19 very early. And there was a very stark news article about that. And that article started to get shared amongst our, and Jill mentioned earlier, the policy group in the cabinet. So it started to get shared about that group. And then we immediately, as a Jesuit university, we have Jesuit priests that are on campus. And those Jesuit priests, I believe their average age is over that vulnerable age of 65. So way back in March, we immediately thought, how are we going to protect our Jesuit residents? That's our goal. Do we create them as sort of a box themselves? How do we make them how do we keep them as safe as possible? Now, this is March. And in March, that meant we're at the point where, okay, we're going to shut down the university. You know, everyone did it on a dime and send everybody home and go from there. But we always had that idea of that vulnerable community. And that vulnerable community was indicative and representative of our faculty community, which is a vulnerable community. And then we also thought that it's important to, and as things evolved over time, I feel like our conversations had those people in mind, but it became a point where with COVID, we're all in a sense one community in this group. So it's almost we decided that we created a box of the university, and we needed to make certain that everyone in that box was part of that community, and our goal was to protect that box as best we could, knowing that as we went through the process, the way we were going to protect it changed. Early it was masks may not be helpful. Now it's you've got to wear a face covering. We've got to have social distancing. We got to have, and then with regard to this is, we thought that testing, while we know that testing is difficult to find, we know that those can't get it, that need it potentially. We realize that if we can find those partners that are able to provide us with those resources without taxing the other resources, then we can get a good baseline and protect our community. And because our community, being a college and university, is one that by its very nature extends into the outlying community in the world, in a sense, the world around our university, we're in a sense protecting them as well. So if we have the benefit and the ability to be able to test, track, trace, and isolate within our box, knowing that our box is very much like a sieve and it will still have people to be able to get out, then we're doing our job to protect our box and by extension protecting the community. So we started off with that really small group of Jesuit priests and then really kind of expanded it, realizing that we're all one sort of community. And that's sort of what sort of drove the process, at least for me, and I think by extension, our testing group.
Yeah, and on that testing group was one of the main ethicists of the university, medical professionals, HR. I mean, they had a really good cross-section of those communities. And another piece of best practices that we've seen Santa Clara push out, and I know UCLA is doing as well. I mean, Sam's been in constant conversation to the extent possible with the county as well to figure out how what they build is consistent with those practices of the wider context in which they're operating. So like everything else we're talking about, there's many, many different details that could roll in. In terms of overall capacity, something that we've seen in our time working on this from SidePorch's perspective, the big labs that have very large capacities have been overwhelmed. And the reporting times have been really challenging for them to get it down to where we need to be able to use these as diagnostic tools rather than research tools. But the private labs across the country do still right now have spare capacity, and they're being run by groups that are able to provide turnaround times. Their capacity is being pushed on now as we move into the fall, and as universities and other groups are making decisions and starting to use their resources. But the ability to connect, the arbitrage in this system of the difficulties involved in identifying, evaluating, and then figuring out how to work with these labs, it's challenging right now. We're hoping over the next couple of months that's going to become easier and easier, being able to identify labs that are run, again, by ethos, values-driven human beings that are trying to be of service while they're trying to build their businesses. is going to be something really, really important. And getting this a mesh network of these labs being able to be pulled together is something hopefully that can occur. But we are seeing capacity available right now, and figuring out how best to direct that capability and capacity over time is going to be something that individual communities have to think through, which again, going back to ethos, how are we trying to be in this world? But then figuring out how we pull that together with other contexts is important. We're coming to the end of the hour. So deep gratitude from us for Jill.
Sean,
Yeah,
Sean,
please.
Can I add one thing? I just want to tack on something that Sam said, and I really would like the community to understand about the vulnerable communities and how this traditional aged college population feel as though they're invincible to this disease and that they just won't get it, and so they continue to party. And that's not just defiance, it's just a need to be a part of a community. So what we've done is we've developed a mask campaign that says, who are you wearing your mask for? And so it kind of helps them to understand that this is not for me, it may be for my professor that is in a vulnerable community, or my parents or my grandparents. And so we're taking it out of their psychological domain and putting it onto someone else. And that has been invaluable.
Jill, thanks for that. Demystifying this and getting clear on incentives is really important. Andy's going to put up a link that we just did a video with a lab that does a video tour of a PCR lab to show this is what it looks like when your samples hit a lab. The guy who runs this lab, Robin Smith, is really an extraordinary human being and someone worth meeting. But if you want to see what a lab looks like on the inside, here's a nice video. There's a quote from Santa Clara that we heard a few weeks back that we want to leave you guys with. We were talking about budget implications, which is real. And we haven't talked about that much on this call, but figuring out how do we afford the resources that are required is an essential component of what we talk about. But someone made a statement that I think I'm going to remember, I hope forever, it was something along the lines of, here at Santa Clara, our job is to care for the whole human being, not the whole budget. And that was really powerful, because it is not dismissing the fact that budget is important, but it's making sure that we really center what our method of evaluation is on what we're doing. So with that, a few logistics. We are going to stop the recording here in a second as soon as I stop talking. We're going to post this, and we're going to try and cobble together what we were able to do to be able to offer to others. If there's anything that we can do, please reach out. We're happy to introduce or connect folks anywhere that can be of service to your communities. You've heard me say of service probably too many times, but that really is a framing that we're taking with this whole effort. And we're going to stay on here for as long as anybody wants to stay and talk and ask questions. We'll stick around. I'm joined by Andy Reamer. Didn't have a chance to talk, but he has become really a pretty solid expert in testing and some other technical details. And you have our information. The email I sent out to everyone's got my cell phone. Call, text, email, anything we can do. But Jill, Bryce, Sam, thank you so much for being in our worlds and for the good work that you're doing to support students and your colleagues. And we really do hope everyone stays safe and healthy as you continue working with this challenge. So we're going to stop the recording now, and happy to stick around and stay in conversation. But thanks again, everybody.